Shanilijanel, why are you crying? What's wrong?
Grandpa, in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 7 it says, "For we walk by faith and not by sight." So I closed my eyes and tried to walk by faith and not by sight, just as it says in the Bible, but I bumped my forehead into the wall, and now it is swelled up and paining me.
Oh no, I am sorry. Let me get something to dress it. But Shanilijanel, walking with your eyes closed was not what the Apostle Paul meant when he said, "For we walk by faith, and not by sight." Careful study reveals in the Bible that the word faith was used in at least 5 different contexts, including the context of law. And evidence indicating that the word faith, in this instance, was used in the context of a law is that the Apostle Paul mentioned it in Romans 1 verse 5, clearly stating that this faith was presented by the Lord Jesus Christ to all the apostles, as well as to all other believers worldwide, for obedience to it. Shortly after his Romans 1 verse 5 statement saying that faith was presented by Christ for obedience to it, Paul, in Romans 3 verse 27 spoke of the law of faith. Later on in Romans 14 verse 23, he said, "For whatsoever is not of faith is sin." But according to 1 John 3 verse 4, sin is the transgression of the law. So when Paul said, "For we walk by faith and not by sight," he quite evidently was speaking of faith in the context of a law, and not personal faith as believed by the 16th century church reformer Martin Luther and many pastors today, and apparently was otherwise saying, "For we Christians walk only in obedience to the commandments in the law of Christ, called faith, and not according to what the other religious persons are doing in terms of their ritualistic observances of the 603 ordinances of the Mosaic Law." Significantly, just prior to, in Romans 3 verse 27, speaking of the law of faith, and just after his Romans 1 verse 5 statement that faith was presented by Christ for obedience to it, in Romans 2 verse 13 Paul said, "For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified." In keeping with this statement, in Galatians 6 verse 2, Paul admonished the Christians to fulfill the law of Christ. So, quite evidently, the term faith, contextually, speaks to an in-force law, the law of Christ. And apparently, in regard to the specificity of this law given by Christ, Hebrews 12 verse 2 said, "Looking unto Jesus the author and finisher of our faith." In other words, no one can legally add to or omit from what Christ initially presented to the apostles and believers for obedience to it worldwide. To violate or not fully obey what Christ has commanded for obedience is to be rejected by him, as he has warned in Matthew 7 verses 21 to 27. Apparently also, the word faith was used by Paul also in terms of making a distinction between the law of Christ and the law of Moses, which was then the long-established Jewish religious law.
Thanks for explaining it to me, Grandpa.